the Candypants Lifestyle Podcast. Interviewing the world's industry leaders on their journey.
Where do we go from here?
Hello. This is a bit weird, isn't it? Just me, sat here on my own, talking into a microphone. But welcome along to the very first Candypants podcast. My name's Nick, and this is actually something we've wanted to do for quite a while. As an events company with parties across the UK, Europe, the Middle East and America, it puts us in a pretty unique position to be able to speak to all kinds of weird and wonderful people from across the world and giving you the chance to hear the story of them and their journey so far. So, what better place to start than with the man who started it all for us? Ray Tran started Candypants back in 2008 in a small nightclub in his hometown. He went on to take the brand around the world, building a restaurant, a clothing brand and a music label along the way. At this point, I should probably say I've never really done a podcast before, so part of me hopes no one's listening. But if you are, I very much hope you enjoy the first episode of the Candypants Lifestyle Podcast. This is the journey of Mr. Ray Tran. Ray, welcome along. Thank you very much for being our first Candypants podcast guest. So to get things started, we'll just jump straight in. If you had to explain what Candypants was to, say, someone who's never heard of it, what would you say?
I would say that since 2008, through a lot of hard work, that Candypants is now possibly a global lifestyle brand with weekly and monthly residencies across the UK, Marbella, Dubai, Ibiza, and we also host or have hosted parties in the Middle East, America, and different parts of Europe.
So how did you get into throwing parties, like just right from the start?
A bit of a random one, really. I didn't really set out and have a career path or a sort of direction when I was growing up. But when I was at sixth form, I took it upon myself to throw the sixth form parties for everyone, and it was, I'd say I can't remember. There was maybe somewhere between 150 to 200 people across the forms, and then you get like other colleges and whatnot that kind of cotton onto things and everything. Yeah. But I remember having to go down there and pitch that it was an 18th birthday or a 19th birthday, and then the day of the event at about 10 to 3, the manager and the security guard pulled me to one side, out the sort of back. They pulled me out there, and I quickly grabbed my mate from sixth form, Matt, who's a lot bigger than me. I dragged him out with me, and the guy's like, "Look, everyone here is underage, aren't they? You're all like 16 or 17." And I just kind of like went, "Well, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, we're all underage." And you know, he kind of looked at me like he wanted to grab my neck and give me a slap, but it was 10 to 3, so he must have known. But yeah, that was my first experience of throwing a party.
So from that, how did Candypants come about?
I mean, I went from sixth form parties to university, and I ended up being involved with a company that organised student parties, and then I ended up sort of doing my own student parties. So around 21, 22, I took a bit of a break from it, because I'd sort of seen a lot of that party side. You know, you get your parents and you get family going, you're going to get a proper job. And I was kind of maybe under a bit of pressure to pursue a career down, you know, a proper career path with, you know, wear a shirt and a tie and whatnot. But obviously something inside me has always given us a fuel for the industry and this particular business. So I was watching the market for quite a while, and I noticed that there was just nothing. There was nothing appealing to a 21 plus crowd outside of pubs, bars, and clubs that had sort of, sweaty ceilings, sticky floors, and a fist pumping environment. That's where it started to, the sort of creative juices were being pulled together, and that's kind of where it started, really. And that was in, like I said earlier, that was in 2008, and the idea was just to pull together a concept that was fun, accessible, safe, with commercial music for everyone, but in a nice environment. The very first party we had was a party box full of props. I think that was from day one a sort of staple, consistent element within the brand. It's become iconic for a lot of people, and I'm sure when people see a silly hat, a big pair of glasses, or inflatable, they know it's Candypants. But it really helps with that social interaction, especially at the events. And we want everyone to have fun, and it kind of doesn't matter if you spend $5,000 or £5. It was, everything's built so that everyone has, is leveled out, and there's no sort of hierarchy within, the events.
Do you know what? I think that's something that when I first met you, that you kind of talked to me about how important that was for Candypants. And I think that really struck a chord with me, because I think in nightclubs, there's such a culture of prioritizing people who spend a fortune. But at the end of the day, the money that someone's got left at the end of the week, whether that be £5 or, as you say, £5,000, it's after they've paid their bills, they've bought everything they need to pay. It's the money they're spending with their free time. However much that is, that means a lot to them. And for them to choose to spend that with you as a brand, obviously that's quite valuable, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I think I've always had a vision of doing things long term, and it's never been about the short term gain. So I've applied that theory across all the businesses, all the projects, and I've always educated that within all the team. So
to go back a couple of steps, something that you mentioned there, I think that anyone, to be honest, most people who understand what Candypants is, you mention it, and what comes to mind is, the big glasses, the big hats, whether it be a quote board or the inflatables, or even if they're old enough to remember, the original Candypants girls with, the knee-high socks and the hot pants. Where did all that come from?
I think that, when we started out, it was, the world was probably in a bit of the sort of early part of social media. And we kind of, being born in 2008, we kind of grew with that Facebook culture. And obviously, that's evolved into other platforms now that we're all familiar with. And outside of the fancy dress box, we had a team of Candy Girls. The Candy Girls have become, the backbone of the brand. It's like one big happy family. But back then, the girls had a uniform, not like they are today, but they had a pair of little red hot pants and little white and red striped knee-high socks. And obviously it became the talk of social media. It became the talk of the UK. And, it's what a certain generation of audience of Candypants and part of that family will remember. But 4 or 5 years into the sort of brand development, I felt like it was a bit of it was time to sort of evolve and grow, and made the decision to sort of remove the pants and socks, which was, which came with a lot of disappointment from a lot of male friends. And, the girls still stayed, the Candy Girls still continued, but they were in their own sort of dresses and whatnot. Yeah. And that was an evolvement, I would say. And I think that adjustment has probably, I'd say paid off, but I think there was periods where when we had the pants and socks, that it may have deterred girls to come.
Right.
And that was a big reason why I wanted to sort of make the changes. And I feel like, and I don't know about yourself, Nick, but I think that we're probably a 65% female friendly brand, in terms of the numbers that come to all the events, on average, across the sort of year. So yeah, that was one big involvement.
So I guess that kind of brings us to like 5 years in.
Yeah.
It's kind of gone from being, once every so often to maybe once a month in Leeds to once a week or however often it was. Where did it kind of go from there?
In that first 5 years, I think it was around 2011, we got asked to do a weekender in Marbella. And, that was sort of like, this is not what we expected. I called around the team and obviously everyone went, yeah, we're coming.
Yeah.
So I think there was about 20 of us from a mixture of candy girls to resident DJs to like managers and friends that all help out. And we all basically flew into Port Banús. And I think that our lively approach and being a sort of really colourful bunch of people brought about a breath of fresh air into the port. Uh-huh. And after a couple of successful events, we got the call later that year to have our first ever summer residency in 2012.
And obviously before you even got to Marbella, it was kind of, you hadn't just stayed in Leeds, you kind of gone across England and done various major cities. How much did that help when you went to somewhere like Spain? Did you have this footprint everywhere around the UK?
Yeah, it helped massively. I mean, end of the day, like in that sort of first few years, we really built up a great following around the UK. At that point, there was, not as much going on, so, and there was other parties and whatnot, but we were definitely sort of like a market leader at that time. So, that helped all that awareness, audience, that connection really helped fuel that Marbella in the sort of early years, which has kind of, made us which gave us the footsteps really into being a brand that everyone associates with Marbella. We got the residency at a nightclub called Tibu every Thursday. And, we were the talk of the town and we kind of grew from there really. So, me being me, I was never one to stand still. And I think the following year I sort of identified that no one was really doing boat parties there. So we started dipping our toe into that. And, it kind of, the boat parties kind of, as you remember, Nick, it was quite a wild period, but they were every week we were selling them out. And I think that, it kind of got to a point where, we had a really, really good lineup in the port and we were really well known. But I think in 2017, I started to think about things in a different way because we launched fashion. The fashion side of the business, and the focus initially was women's swimwear, and that was launched in the summer of 17. And I think that the winter of 17 made me reflect and think about sort of things on a development level where we needed more daytime events to expose the bikinis and the swimwear and everything. So it was a difficult decision, but we stopped doing the boat parties that following year, and we moved to a beach club in Port Banús called Plaza Beach for our day element. And as a result of that, our evening partners was the newly opened Mirage nightclub, and that's where we operate today.
So just to go back a step, you mentioned obviously about the boat parties and stuff, and I think probably whether people have noticed or not, I mean, I noticed even before I was involved. Obviously, you did the boat parties before that was kind of a thing in Marbella or really many places. Even in Dubai, you've done kind of pool parties based around afternoon tea. The events have always been a little bit kind of trying to do things differently. Is that something that you have purposely tried to do from the start?
Yeah, I just think that, like I said, I think I touched on it before, but for us, it's always about trying to just do things a bit differently. I don't like to copy or go down a certain route, and I'd rather much do something that's never been done. So, that's the kind of thought process.
Because, I mean, you said something there about obviously always trying to do things differently. And I don't know, this is probably a difficult one to ask, but, it seems like now everywhere you go, there is parties with quote boards, they've got hats, party props. So people do, obviously have kind of seen that and thought, oh, that's a good idea, we'll do that. And maybe copied a little bit. Does that, bother you or not?
To be honest, it doesn't really bother me as much as it bothers you, Nick. But
that is very true.
I've got to take it as a compliment at the end of the day. Yeah, you are.
Imitation is the biggest form of flattery, I'm told. I keep telling myself
exactly.
that.
Exactly. If trends happen because of what you're doing, then you're on the right path. So it's cool.
So talking of paths, if we try and keep following yours.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, it's obviously the Dubai thing came about, which obviously a lot of people will know Candypants for now. But how did that journey start?
So it was back in 2012, and I made the decision to try break into London, and we threw a few parties, and then all of a sudden Dubai came calling, and I just thought, well, London is our capital. It's on our doorstep. It's not going anywhere. Never heard of Dubai before, as in never been, not sure what it's about, but
what year was this?
Let's give this a go. We did a pop-up party at Cirque in October 2013.
Because this is
the start. Yeah.
It's almost before I suppose, before Dubai became cool,
Dubai
became the place to go to, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we were kind of the first in, one of the first in maybe. It showed that the brand was growing and was transferable across different areas, which kind of led us into the beginning of 2014, and we got offered a 6-month monthly residency at a nightclub in Dubai called Mavida, and that was till the summer. Those again went really well, really busy. We got a lot more support on radio and things like that, and it just showed that sort of how far the brand has gone, and I think that the UK and especially the Marbella side of things helped accelerate that.
I mean, I'm still now, obviously I've been involved for Candypants for a few years, but I'm still kind of...
More than a few,
but I'm still kind of the baby compared to other people.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was at uni at the time, I wasn't involved in Candypants, and I was running kind of student events while I was at university. And I remember my bosses telling me that they were going to Dubai because Candypants were doing their first event in Dubai, and they were going to support them. And I remember as a 20-year-old kid who was kind of involved in nightclubs and stuff, just finding that completely mind-blowing. Just that thing of being, first of all, how the heck have they grown a party from a city in the UK? They've done, obviously, the whole... Candypants was, to me, seemed huge anyway. But the fact that it had gone to Dubai just kind of blew my mind.
Still blows my mind occasionally when I actually think about it. But I guess it's my vision has always been to think long term and chip away at it, work hard, be consistent, and I guess that and there's a bit of fate as well in directions that where things take you, and I think that the Dubai era was probably supposed to happen because there's a lot of friends that I went to uni with that all ended up here, and they're still here now. So
I think that the Dubai journey, I think there'll probably be a lot of people listening to this who might be a little bit surprised by the whole Cirque thing, because I've seen a lot of people who when they say, "Oh, how did Candypants start in Dubai?" You mentioned 2013 in Cirque, and to them it's like, "Oh, really? I just thought it started with when brunch started."
Well, I think that having now sort of been going 12 years, you get new people that discover the brand, every week. So the people's association or connection with the brand will come at different stages, and I think that there's probably as we've got bigger and bigger and bigger, especially over the sort of the past 5-6 years. There's a lot of people that forget that we started in a little town called Leeds, and we were more than we were doing things in nightclubs before we were doing brunch, and but I guess if people know us for our reputation of brunch, it shows that we've done something right. I remember after asking you to do like a recce, it was then, well, how do we make this work? And it got my brain working. And when that call came, it was a kind of like, right, okay, this is time to put that sort of thought process and accelerate it a little bit further. And yeah, do you remember when we rocked up to the Habitat Grand that day? I think it was middle of December 2014 with 2 big bags of fancy dress. And the management, the staff were looking at us like we'd come from Mars.
It was like, who are these 2 clowns? Like, why are they here? Why have we had to get up early on a Friday? And it's funny to look back now, I suppose, yeah. Yeah, and I think that, as the day unfolded, I think there was maybe about 80 people at the first event. And I remember the sort of management were baffled by all these inflatables, all these big hats, all these giant glasses, and weirdly, me and you running round. But, I felt like it was the makings of what we know brunch as now. But it wasn't straightforward, because I remember week 2 was 50 people. I think week 3 was Boxing Day. There was 15 people there. And I think that was the owner and his friends. And I remember you panicking, but equally I saw the sort of medium to long term of it. And if we stick to our vision, stick to our consistency of what we do, it will work. We were kind of saying, if we can get into people's referrals of something to do in Dubai, then we probably built the first stage of what we wanted to do in the city. And then I think it was it later that year when we won that Time Out award? I think so. I think what was interesting is, obviously, I think it's strange to say it now, but when you look back, like, we kind of, I suppose, built something that didn't exist at the time. Like, party brunches wasn't really a concept. Like, this is like 2014. It's not now where kind of everyone knows what a party brunch is. Like, there wasn't a category in the awards. Well, they became but yeah, there certainly wasn't a category, because I remember being in my bed in the UK, getting a load of messages one night, and a few photos sent of a big stage. It said Time Out Best Party Brunch 2015 Candypants, and I'm like, we did not know about this. And then I remember messaging you're getting inundated with messages, and I think I said to you, look, you better get ready, mate, and go to that after party and go shake some hands and collect that award. Well, that was the thing. I mean, I don't know the full what I've previously since heard is that I think it got to the point where there wasn't even really a category for this, because party brunch wasn't a thing. But I think what we'd done had, I don't want to sound like we're blowing our own trumpets here, but we'd clearly done something that was different. And, a magazine like that had kind of said, well, you can't not recognize that. And I guess it kind of went from there, really, didn't it? Yeah, and I think that the same, I think that same summer, we started to evolve things a bit more. And I think that was when we pushed the boundaries and did our first mega brunch, like in a tent, which had questionable air conditioning. And I think we didn't really get much support. So there was me, you, load of cranes, setting up for 5 days. And we managed to sell it to somewhere, around 700-800 people for that first one, to make it mega, to make it like a big deal. 700 to 800 very warm people turned up that day anyway.
And I guess from that moment on, from a brand perspective, that really helped set up our infrastructure for what people know now in the city, which kind of brings us on to where we went next, really.
I think that is an example, if ever there was one, of there is a myth that, you know, in our jobs it's very glamorous, you just rock up to parties. But if there was ever an example of debunking that myth, it's me and you stood in what can only be described as a giant greenhouse, probably the size of a football pitch, with no aircon in the middle.
It was the size of a football pitch.
It was huge. In the middle of Dubai summer, in our boxer shorts, dripping wet, moving furniture, because it was just us. There was no one else. It
was mad, really, at that time.
To look back, it's funny. And from there, so obviously Dubai it kind of snowballed, I guess, the brunch, and became it's a beast in its own right, really. But from there, kind of Ibiza was next. Is that right?
Yeah. So we started our journey in Ibiza around 2017. Funny enough, I got a phone call from an old friend that was involved in the Cirque event from Dubai in 2013, and he called me up and said, "Oh, we're building a STK in Ibiza," and I was like, "Oh wow, that's big, global sort of American brand." And he was like, "Yeah," he goes, "We've got a pool outside that's part of the hotel. Why don't you do there's no brunch here. Why don't you do brunch?" And I'm like, "Okay, let's run with it. Let's give it a go." I felt like, I mean, for those listening today, I think that that concept didn't quite work. I think we're a bit ahead of the curve in terms of like bringing what we learned in Dubai and bringing it back to like Europe and stuff.
Because like brunch is a thing now, isn't it? And brunch,
it's becoming the thing.
Yeah.
So we quickly decided to move what bookings we had into the evening, which was what STK is known for. I remember that night it was a busy restaurant. There was some big influential characters in town and at the event. I think the owners of Ultra Music Festival were there, and I guess that's where we built our concepts in Dinner Disco and Doris's Dinner Party from that night, and that's where we've kind of now home to in Ibiza. And as a result, over the past few years, we've developed a residency in Dubai, as we all know, as you know, in the downtown branch, and that kind of brought us into where we did a big one-off party at the Miami South Beach branch, and that was kind of the next phase of the journey where we took the brand to America.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It's the big one, taking Candypants across the pond. So do you want to maybe go in a bit more? Because I don't think a lot of people know about the Miami thing, to be honest, do they?
I'm not sure. I think that it was March 2018. That was our 10-year anniversary, and one of my big sort of secret goals was to sort of get the brand over to America, and especially to a place like Miami or New York or what I view as like sort of the pinnacle of nightlife, like Las Vegas. And the opportunity came up to do something at STK, and I thought, well, it was Miami Music Week. We had a relationship with like the owners of Ultra Music Festival, and we managed to piece together a 2-day event where we did a dinner disco party on the Thursday at the South Beach STK, which went really well. And then one of our residents, Mick Willow, we got him on the lineup at Ultra at one of the stages. So it was quite an epic, iconic sort of period, as well as a big hangover. But that's a different story.
So from Miami, I suppose that leads us on to, well, the big one really, right? Vegas.
I think when we turned 10, a lot of I think there's a lot to be said about a brand that can go on for that amount of time, really. And I think 10 years was like a big milestone. And when we hit that and people saw what we were doing, in Dubai and Ibiza, Marbella, around the UK, and then setting foot in America, more that kind of like fueled more people to reach out to us. And then one of the biggest operators in America and maybe even the world, in our industry anyway, Tao Group, they reached out to us, and we ended up doing a pool party in Las Vegas, which was very surreal.
I feel like you brushed over that a little bit. Like, to get things straight, there was billboards around Vegas. I mean, one of the lads got a Candypants tattoo because he thought that.
Well, yeah, I'll elaborate on that. So the billboards were very surreal to see, the Candypants brand and our artwork on billboards on the strip was a very sort of, surreal moment, really, and feeling, because, it's kind of like the pinnacle of nightlife. At that point, we've had 10 years of experience. You put the team together, we've had 20 years of experience, and there's not a party that we haven't kind of done or not made work. So it was a case of like, right, well, let's, we all knew what we had to do. Even if we were blind drunk, I think we all knew what we had to do. But, it was just very surreal. And as we got closer to the event and closer to, or even on the day, it was more about, right, it's not about basking in the glory now. It's like me being me. It was like, right, how do we move forward from this? What's next? What's next, short, medium, long term? And it was like, well, how do we make this work? And how do we come out the other side, and what we're going to do? There was a big, like, European, UK, like, crowd over, and once everyone knew that they were going to the fight, they were going to Vegas. They got wind that we were getting the bookings. But I feel like whenever we do stuff, and it's become a bit of a running joke within the Candypants team, is that sometimes things don't always go our way. So when we woke up that day, and bear in mind, we're in the desert, it was cloudy, it was raining, it was windy, and
it was cold.
I was a bit like,
it was very cold.
I think it was cold enough that everyone bought hoodies and everyone wore hoodies at a pool party. So that's kind of how cold it was. And we couldn't show off one of the DJ's newly inked tattoos that we got the night before, because when I said to him 2 years before that, I'll get you playing in Vegas at some point in the future, he goes, if you get me playing in Vegas, I'll get a tattoo, a Candypants tattoo. So we held him to that, and he's now got one somewhere. I think it's under his arm. So if you see Tango anywhere, that's has to see it. I think there's a route CP somewhere, little sign, little plaque on his arm.
I mean, that was the memory for me. I mean, to be, I think it was the night before the event. We're on Vegas Strip. There's a billboard with Candypants on right in the middle of the strip, flashing the brand that we've all worked so hard to build. And the lads are there. Obviously, their faces are on, the lads, the DJs. And there's Tango. There's a tattoo shop. You're getting a tattoo right now because you promised 2 years ago, if we ever got here, you were getting one. I guess that kind of like, so it brings us a little bit up to speed now. So it's 10 years.
Yeah, up to speed. The event, by the way, exceeded the expectations of the venue. We pulled it round, even though it was a dark, wet, windy day. And that kind of brought us to that sort of iconic moment within our history.
So just to kind of stick on that for a second, you've got the 10th birthday, an event that you kind of started in a nightclub in your hometown. You've taken it across Europe, you've taken it into the Middle East, You then take it into America. I know you, so I kind of got an idea where this answer may go. But did you at any point just stand there and go, done pretty well here?
Not really. I mean, there's occasions where I actually like step out of it and think, Jesus Christ, what's going on? This is a bit mad. But you know, I'm not one to bask in my own glory. And like I said, I've always got that. Well, what's next? You know, what's our next move? And it was a key. You know, I don't know. Maybe it's not in my makeup, should I say?
Well, I suppose that leads me a little bit on nicely to kind of where I was going to go next, and that anyone who knows you knows that you tend not to stand still. You tend to be the busiest man that certainly I know. But obviously, all this time you've spent working in nightclubs and in restaurants and brunches and all the rest of it, that must have led you to maybe some other opportunities to do other things, not just Candypants.
Yeah, I think. You know, we're blessed to work in our industry, and you know, with that, you meet a lot of people with different backgrounds, different skill sets. You know, across the world, made some great friends. An opportunity came up to open a restaurant in my hometown, Leeds, and I kind of ran with it at that point. And you know, it's sort of, you know, it's still running today. It's called Man's Market. It was built off trying to prove a point to some family. I remember my uncle had a very successful business in London, a really successful restaurant, which then sort of downgraded as he got older into a takeaway. And I remember being in London when I was in the corporate period of my life, and just saying to him, if business isn't as good as you'd like it to be, you should really do maybe some marketing, like drop some flyers off at in the local neighborhood. And he kind of shot me down, and, you know, and it kind of made me think about sort of business then, and think about sort of the Chinese food market, and having kind of come from a background of Chinese. I grew up in a Chinese takeaway, for those that don't know. And it kind of pulled me into that statement pulled me into making that restaurant. Basically, I watched the market for over 10 years, nothing changed. And the opportunity came up to do a site came up in Leeds, and basically I built something from nothing really in terms of what it is today.
And I think if you say a Chinese restaurant to a lot of people, they have maybe an image in their head, and anyone who's been to Man's Market know that it's probably as far from what you'd imagine a Chinese restaurant to be.
Yeah. I mean, everyone remembers. Like, I grew up in a Chinese takeaway, and eventually worked in my uncle's restaurant to learn that side of things. And you know, that restaurant had a fish tank, it had a dragon on the wall, it had a carpet. Yeah. We were all in black dicky bows, and you know, there was basically maybe one non-Chinese person working there, and that was the DJ on a Friday and Saturday night.
Right.
So Man's Market was really built as a bit of a project to go against that. Again, being a bit different. Again, trying to be a bit of a market leader and doing things differently. And there is certainly no fish tank. There's no dragon on the wall. There's no carpet. The only Chinese person working there is the chef, David, and the kitchen is big and open, and everyone can see in it. So once I pulled a team together, got the approvals, it started to move very quickly in that period, and I took it upon myself. And this is what goes back to CP. You know, I went through my phone book and thought, do I know an electrician? Do I know a plumber? Do I know somebody that can do air conditioning? Do I know somebody that can build walls, lay floors, build a kitchen? Do I know a chef? Do I know this and that? And I pulled everyone together, and we opened in November 16, and which brings me on to, this is how mad everything's been over the past 3-4 years. But in December 16, my friend threw his 40th birthday party at the restaurant, and an old friend of mine, Mason, came to me during that and went, "Dude, I'm ready to go with what we've been discussing for like the past 4 years." And I'm like, "Ready to go with what?" And he's like, "Well, you know, the idea of doing Candypants clothing." I'm like, "Oh my God, like not right now." He goes, "No, I'm ready. I've got a team ready. I've built a team. Everyone's going to start in January." And I'm like, "What? You know, you can't do this to us. Like we barely just built this and got it going." Which kind of brings us on to the clothing.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I seem to see this Candypants swimwear is like everywhere now, isn't it? How did that start?
Well, me and Mason, old friends from Leeds, and he said to me, "Look, my company, my business is fashion. We supply a lot of the high street retailers with like underwear and swimwear and everything. And I really seen what you've done with the brand. Obviously, I've partied at it, and I really want to. I think that there's legs in a Candypants clothing line." And I was like, "Okay, like this sounds interesting." And before I knew it, we were sat at Arcadia, the company that owned Topshop and a load of others, and we were sat in their canteen on Oxford Street, speaking to like the owner's right hand man, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he was like, "Oh, I love everything that you're doing. But I just don't think you're quite there yet or ready yet, or you've quite understood who you are, what you're doing as a brand." And so every year from there, me and Mason spoke, and it was always like, I'll pull up at his office, we'd talk about it, then maybe 6 months later we'd reconnect. And so for him to sort of, like come to me in December, it was probably 4 years of thinking about it, and he's been working on it behind the scenes, getting his strategy right and everything. And yeah, I mean, we launched in 17, and the swimwear sits on ASOS. We were in 10 Topshop stores last year, and it's on Namshi in the Middle East, which is pretty bonkers. Back in that period, it was clearly evident that the brand was evolving. It was really changing the direction of the brand. And, one of the big things that I wanted to tick was music, because, I feel like fashion, music, events, they all go hand in hand. The plan was to launch Candypants Music in 4, maybe 5 different stages. And first stage has already been launched. So we've got a platform now on Spotify, which everyone is aware of, with different types of playlists, from workout to brunch to poolside. We've even got a lockdown one, which is quite relevant at the minute for everyone listening. And then the second and the third part was really what we're on today, with our network and our black book and the contacts we've met all around the world and friends. Been fortunate to have met a lot of industry leaders, and I felt like it was we were well placed to build a platform, so people understood, who is behind certain big brands in different sectors, like who's behind the club that you always go to, or who is behind that favorite restaurant of yours, or who's behind that big group, or who's behind that company that organizes the boxing. And so we've got that because of that network, and that's the sort of second phase of what we're trying to do. And I know that you've committed your time to being the presenter, Nick, so respect and fair play. And then the third one, which you just briefly touched on earlier, was we're launching radio. So we'll be launching radio at some point soon, and we'll be having a weekly show that's probably going to help gel and merge everything we're doing together, and it should be on some major global stations at some point in the near future. So that kind of ties those 3 elements up together. And the fourth and 5th, which will probably come slightly later. But for anyone listening, don't hesitate to contact us. We'll be looking to sign new records, new artists, and something I want to do personally is really want to help grow the next generation of DJs and give something back and give them a platform to platform of events to play out and a platform for their music to be heard, and then maybe in terms of on the podcast for their views and their opinions to be voiced as well.
So, final question. This is something I'm going to try and do with everyone. If you could make a phone call to Ray Chan, the 17-year-old who's just thrown a party with all of his underage mates, what would you say to him? Like, what advice would you give him?
I'd give him a call. I would say to him, be proud of what you're doing. Be proud of what you achieved, having had no experience or knowledge or anything. Enjoy it, learn from it. Life's about living. So you've got to learn from your mistakes, but also, something that I didn't really, I did a lot of self-learning and winged my way through. Then kind of woke up and realized everything was like, there's a huge opportunity. I'd tell that 17-year-old me to focus on it a lot earlier, maybe educate themselves a bit on it earlier and actually steer themselves that way without discovering it. And also to just be patient, focused and consistent.
Sounds like a lot of things you try to tell me quite a lot.
Yeah, every day.
So I think that brings us to the end, to be honest. So if people want to keep an eye on what you're up to, where can they find you on Instagram and stuff like that? Yeah,
Instagram wise, it's Ray CH number 8N. So Ray Chan with a 8 on the second A. And I'm on there.
I'll be honest, I think 17-year-old Ray will be pretty blown away if somebody was to tell him what Ray would go on to achieve. I know that probably listening back, even I am, and I know the story pretty well. But, it probably wouldn't have been right to have anybody else as our first guest. So thank you very much for coming on. I more than anyone understand how busy you are. So thanks for being our first guest. And I guess this has been the very first Candypants podcast. And this has been the journey of Ray Chan.
No worries. Thanks, mate.
That's it. I think I've just about managed to survive our first ever podcast. And I hope you have too. We're going to keep going with the podcast over the next few weeks. We've actually got some really good guests. People, even I am very surprised they have agreed to it. But if you are still looking for your daily dose of Candypants, there is plenty you can listen to in the meantime. Music-wise, we've got a range of free playlists on Spotify. You've just got to search Candypants Music and they will all come up there. Candypants Radio is coming very soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And don't forget, if you are on the lookout for some swimwear for when summer, hopefully, eventually arrives, you can check out Candypants Store on Instagram, and that is available on www.candypants.com, ASOS and Namshi too. P.S. People who know a lot more about podcasts than I do tell me at this point I'm meant to say, if you have enjoyed this episode, please, please, please click subscribe. You'll both get all of the episodes directly to your phone as soon as they're released, and you'll also make me very, very happy. So thank you very much for listening. This has been the very first Candypants podcast, and we'll see you very, very soon.